So I thought I'd tell you a little bit about our trip. One of the places that we went in Indonesia was called Jambi, and it's a city. And outside the city, across the river, um, is Muara, Jambi, which is the location of the ruins where there used to be a great monastic university that seemed, from what I learned, to be enormous, not just a small one, but a really prominent one. So much so that in ancient times, the Chinese monks who wanted to go to Nalanda would stop at Jambi for a year or two to learn Sanskrit before they went to Nalanda. Yeah, so it was a pretty prominent place. It was also the place where Lama Serlingpa, Lama Atisha's guru, was. And it's a huge area. I forget how many square kilometers it was. You don't remember either. And but there were, I think, 80 or 100, temples, or they called them chandis. I'm not quite sure what a chandi is. A temple, a stupa, some kind of site where there had been, Buddhist religious activity going on. And it became a site very early on in the Sri Vijaya empire. It was part of that one, and that empire went from like southern Cambodia to parts of Thailand, down the Malay Peninsula into Sumatra. It was quite a large empire, and it was Hindu and Buddhist together. It seemed like, and it also extended into Java, the Java island. That's part of the Indonesian archipelago chain of islands. 17,000 islands, yeah, make up Indonesia. And it spans 4 time zones. I mean, that's how big the country is. So to get from one part of the country to the other by plane is at least 8 hours, So it's huge. Anyway, Jambi was located at just a little bit inland from the straits that separated Sumatra from the Malay string of islands, and the Malay Peninsula. That one I can say, yeah. So it was inland on Sumatra there, and the land was it's jungle. It's a tropical jungle, and some of the sites have been more developed than others. In general, the government doesn't want to do too much excavation and archaeological work on the Buddhist sites because that would really bring home to the Muslim community, who form the greater majority of the Indonesian population, that actually they were Buddhist before they became Muslim. So in this huge area, with the 80 plus sites, some were more developed than others. One we went to, there was grass around and they had reconstructed it, and there was even a few little vendors that sold malas and snacks. But that was the most developed it got. Even in that area, when we walked a few feet away from it, you would see just piles of bricks. That's what they used in the ancient times, and that was covered by dirt with trees growing in it and so on. We went to one place that was right smack in the middle of the jungle, and they said that before that place had been excavated, it was completely covered over and overgrown, you know, and so they don't even know in that area all the sites there are and what's under it, because the jungle has been growing on top of it. But it was a huge Buddhist site, and it was very moving to go there and just think of all the people that studied there, because it started, I think, around the 5th, 6th, 7th century, wasn't it, with the Srivijaya kingdom, and then Lama Tsarlingpa wasn't until the 11th century, and the the Muslims didn't completely take over the area until the 16th century. So for quite a while, it was, a prominent Buddhist place. And now all you see is, in some areas they've reconstructed things a little bit as best as they could. But even there's places with just the bricks covered with dirt. And you stop and you think, who was there and what were they doing and how did they practice? And the houses that the lay people live in that area, are probably very similar to what the monastics lived in. Made with wood, with thatched huts. Uh, they were usually up off the ground as a protection from animals and snakes and other kinds of things. And, they get destroyed very easily. In fact, there was a tsunami just yesterday in Indonesia, in the straits that separate Java and Sumatra. And, you know, they said, at the time I read about it, it was 222 people had been killed and hundreds more injured, and probably the death toll has gone up since then. But the islands, it's jungle, but it's on the ring of fire. That starts up by Alaska and goes into Japan, into Taiwan, and further down where you have all the earthquakes and such. But trying to think about what life was like there, how they lived. They were doing debate. They were, doing the same monastic practices that we've been doing the last couple of days. And one place we went to, there was another place that was a couple of miles away, and they had a path maybe about this big, wide, going. It was kind of stone path, but it missed stones in some places. Just walking right through the jungle, and I found that just an amazing experience to have, walking through that jungle and seeing a few little, huts here and there, and piles of stones, and this thick jungle, monkeys and whoever else was living in there, and thinking, and it led us to another place that also had been somewhat excavated but not thoroughly, and wondering, gee, were there different teachers at these places, and then the students walk from one place to another to take teachings from different students, from different teachers, or were they broken up? So one was maybe an Abhidharma area, and one was a Prajnaparamita area, and one was a Vinaya area. We don't really know. Yeah, there's so little research done, and of course, in that kind of climate, the bricks are probably the only thing that remain. Everything else was decayed. All the scriptures, were probably rotted away. Uh, but it really makes you think about just the fragility of the Sangha, even in an area where Buddhism was so widespread, there in Sumatra, similarly in India. and how, you know, it can get wiped out so easily. It's not difficult. Yeah. And it gave me a lot of pause to think, because I've been thinking for years, ever since I did pilgrimage in China, um, about, what is most important to do to spread the Dharma in the long term. And there were two uh, Chinese monks, both of whom had gone to Tibet in the 1930s and 40s, and then came back to China. One was Venerable Ninghai, and he set up a monastery in southern China and trained people. And that's what he left behind, was a functioning monastic community that knew all the, that studied the Dharma and did, the ceremonies and so on. And then there was Venerable, oh, why am I forgetting his name? He translated so many texts, and I have so much respect for him. And his name is Fatsun, yeah, Venerable Fatsun. And he, when he came back from Tibet, was based in Beijing, and he did a lot of translations. So he left behind texts. So I thought, you can leave behind students, you can leave behind texts. When I was there in Jambi, but you also leave behind buildings, because without the buildings being there, we wouldn't have even known that there were people and texts that once were there, and how Buddhism was destroyed in China during the Cultural Revolution. You still have the buildings, and they're being redone and so on. But it really makes you think how fragile things are, how the law of impermanence just strikes everything that we think is so valuable and precious. And, as we can't prevent impermanence from happening. But really thinking about all the people that lived there, that studied there, all the virtue that was created in that place, due to the accumulation of all the people doing that. And then we come along, and kind of looking at it. We weren't actually tourists, we were more pilgrims. But if they developed it, I'm sure they would get tourists coming along. When we went, where we went, the first big place, walking through the jungle and so on, there was no place even to buy a bottle of water. That's how undeveloped it was. And it was nice in that way because, that was it. But it really made me think about, what we're doing here and setting things up. And, of course, everything we build and everything we develop, even though our aim is that it lasts for 10,000 years, may it last for 100,000, if the planet is still here and habitable then. But eventually, everything is going to decay. But at the same time, we need to build it now so we can use it and for the immediate future, so that we can really establish the Dharma and the Sangha and the Buddha here in this country. Yeah, so just, you can tell I'm still processing it all. I don't have a one-line summary at the end. That was my final conclusion from that. But it was very moving. One other place we went out there 2 days. The first day we were there morning and afternoon. And I should tell you, because usually when you're in that climate, you sweat, but you try and temper it a little bit and not sweat too much. But when we were out there, I just forget it. Don't even try, because you were drenched by after the first 5 minutes, and definitely walking through the jungle, just completely soaking wet. Um, yeah, but it was kind of fun because you just said, okay, I'm not even going to care if how much I sweat and how I look. When I go to teach, it's like, well, I'd rather not be sweating too much. But here, just to forget it. Yeah. Um, and then the second day, at the end of the retreat that afternoon, we went out again, and we went to one place where there was it was in a forested area, but this one area, the trees were special. They weren't like in the rest of the forest. Yeah. And the rest of the forest, they have rubber trees. It's a big crop there and all sorts of other things. But here, the trees, nobody knew the name of them. It was like, it wasn't just a tree trunk like this. It was like part of a trunk coming up here and part of a trunk this way and part this way there, and huge tall trees. It was like the trees had a feeling of grace, of dancing, just the way the limbs and the parts of the trunk and everything came together. It was really quite special. And that area with the trees, again, there were piles of bricks. You didn't know if they were a building or a stupa or who knew what. But quite moving, just the feeling in the area that you had with those trees. And then, of course, we went to another hill, which they said was a man-made hill, but they also said that this is where Lama Serlingpa lived and where Lama Atisha went to study with him. And we usually hear in the Lamrim that Lama Atisha checked out Lama Serlingpa for 12 years before he studied with him. In the story there, he went there and he studied with him for 12 years. That makes a lot more sense to me. Although the story that they tell in the Tibetan tradition has a good purpose, okay, to really check out a teacher well. But they say that Atisha went there and lived together with Serlingpa on that hill. Yeah, the hill was called the Silver Hill, wasn't it? Yeah, because they had found some silver artifacts there from who knows how many centuries ago. So we climbed the hill, and then it was real fun getting down because, yeah, it was real fun. And especially for some of the people who had lived in the city, who were Jakarta people. This was their adventure walk, trying to walk down, because it was a small hill, but, very scary for them. uh, yeah. So just making you think about centuries of people living there, what their experience was, um, what they left behind, what karma they created while they were there, and where are they now, and who are they now? In what realm? We don't know. Okay, so just some thoughts.